welcome to the deep dive.
Yeah.
Today we're tackling a really tough, but I think vital subject.
Mm-hmm.
The impact of these incredibly powerful visuals coming out of conflict zones.
Mm-hmm.
Our focus is specifically on the, well, often very disturbing images emerging from Gaza. And we're grounding our discussion in a pretty thought-provoking opinion piece from Al Jazeera.
Right. The title translates roughly to something like, so that the reasonable mind does not adapt to the photograph sector, which is quite a statement in itself.
It really is. So our goal, our mission for this deep dive is to try and understand how these images actually function. What impact are they meant to have?
And also, what are the big challenges they face? Because getting a consistent global response, well, that's proving incredibly difficult. We'll look at different views on their effectiveness and some of the ethical questions, too.
Okay, let's get into this Al Jazeera piece. It kicks off by saying these raw, really intense pictures from Gaza.
Yeah.
And they're meant to shock us, right?
Yeah, deliberately. Yeah. To challenge any sense of normalization when it comes to suffering, to stop us just getting used to it.
But it immediately asks that big question. Are these horrific visuals, actually changing global opinion? Are they leading to real action?
That's the core tension, isn't it? The article points out this paradox. The intent is shock, strong reaction, maybe intervention. But there's a very real risk, it suggests, that constantly seeing this kind of graphic content could actually lead to, well, desensitization.
Right, you become numb.
Or maybe overwhelmed.
Exactly. Overwhelmed is a good word. The sheer scale of it might just make people disengage, turn away, kind of emotionally protect themselves.
Which is the opposite of the intended effect. But the article also strongly argues that these visuals are crucial as proof.
Absolutely. Undeniable proof. The author really emphasizes this, that the visual documentation is critical evidence. It stands against narratives that might try to downplay or even deny what's happening.
So it's a weapon against misinformation in a way. Precisely. And that phrase in the title, so the reasonable mind does not adapt, it speaks to that. It implies we have a sort of moral duty not to adapt, not to accept it.
Okay, so that's the power. But then the challenge is, this is where it gets, well, really complicated, I think. The article dives into why it's so hard to get that widespread empathy in action.
Yeah, it talks about how audiences might become desensitized, like we mentioned, but also it raises the point about interpretation, how these images are seen through different lenses.
Ah, right. Like different media outlets or political viewpoints shaping the narrative around the image.
Exactly that. The article suggests, that Western-centric media or political groups might filter these images through their own biases.
Potentially diluting the message. Or twisting it.
Or twisting it, yeah. Misrepresenting the intended message, perhaps unintentionally, perhaps not, which leads to these wildly different reactions globally.
That's something the article really points out, just how varied the reception is.
Massively varied. You see everything from, immediate outrage and demands for justice, all the way to denial, people trying to justify things, or just dismissing the evidence altogether.
And our own pre-existing views, our politics, our cultural background, they all play a huge role in how we interpret what we're seeing.
They'd inevitably shape it. There's no neutral viewing, really.
Which brings us back to the importance of these images as evidence, beyond just the emotional reaction. The article stresses their role in accountability.
Yes, it does. It positions this documentation as vital evidence for potential war crimes, for human rights violations. It's about creating a record.
A record that challenges official stories and demands accountability.
And it constantly reminds us of the human cost. The article specifically mentions the image of a burned child as just one example of the horrific reality being documented. It forces you to confront the impact on individuals, especially the most vulnerable.
So the underlying intent, according to the author, is really to fight against complacency. To use this flood of imagery to stop the world just getting used to the suffering in Gaza.
Yeah, it's like a constant attempt to reignite outrage, to keep the pressure on for intervention, for accountability.
The sheer volume and horror are meant to break through indifference.
That seems to be the belief, yes. That images can succeed where maybe words alone fail to convey the urgency or the reality.
But importantly, the article does acknowledge the criticisms of this approach. It doesn't present it as a perfect strategy.
No, definitely not. It brings up the concern that focusing only on the graphic imagery could be seen as exploitative.
How so? Like focusing on suffering without context?
Potentially, yeah. Or maybe overshadowing the broader political context, the history, the complexities of the situation. It raises that question implicitly.
And it also touches on whether this constant barrage of horror is actually the most effective way in the long run. Does it build sustainable understanding and support?
Or does it, as we discussed, risk leading to helplessness? That feeling of, it's just too much, there's nothing I can do. Resignation, perhaps?
That's a really crucial tension. The desire to shock versus the risk of paralysis,
hmm And that leads nicely into the author's concluding thoughts.
which emphasize context, right?
Exactly. The piece suggests that while these graphic images play a crucial role, a vital one, in documenting atrocities,
They can't stand alone.
they shouldn't stand alone. They need to be paired with broader analysis, understanding the root causes, the complex dynamics at play,
So moving beyond just witnessing the horror.
to actively engaging with the political and ethical questions, understanding the why as well as the what.
Okay, so let's try and sum up what we've pulled from this Al Jazeera piece. Essentially, graphic imagery from places like Gaza is incredibly potent. It's intended as stark documentation, meant to provoke action, to challenge us accepting suffering as normal.
That's actual impact is really complex. It's contested. It varies hugely depending on the audience, the media landscape, pre-existing biases, all of that. It can lead to outrage, but also potentially to desensitization or avoidance.
It's a powerful tool, but one whose effects are far from straightforward.
Absolutely. And that leaves us, and you listening, with something to think about, doesn't it?
Definitely.
I mean, we're all constantly swimming in this sea of images, especially online. Many of them are difficult, disturbing.
So the question is, for you personally, how do you navigate that? How do you find the balance between staying informed about really important world events and, well, protecting yourself from being completely overwhelmed or desensitized?
And maybe think about what role you ultimately believe these kinds of powerful, often horrific images play. Do they shape global awareness? Do they drive our collective response to humanitarian crises? Or is their impact more limited, more complicated than we sometimes assume?
Something to definitely reflect on.